I'm Martin Jarvis, and once again, I want to welcome you to another perspective. My journey from atheist to awake, that's what we're going to talk about. If you notice, I didn't use the word woke, because woke today has such a negative connotation amongst a certain segment of our population. And I don't want to start off there. This program is inclusive to all people, because we're all really in the same boat. So we're not going to use the term woke. Now really, woke initially wasn't such a bad thing. All woke simply meant in the black community, which is where that term originated, was just not subject to the misunderstandings that were leading a segment of the population down the wrong paths. That was woke. But the political world co-opted that term, hijacked it, and began to turn it into simply a descriptive word for the left of the Democratic Party. So we're not going to use that because we're not political here. We're just trying to find a way to be well in life, regardless of what's going on in the world, you know. And I believe that if enough of us find this wellness, we'll be able to infect, and affect the world. So we're saying awake. This is going to be my journey from atheist to awake. And I think being awake is, we can really look at it like the difference between being asleep, at night, and then awakening. Where you might be seeing things in a particular way while you're asleep, while you're dreaming, imagining this and imagining that. But sleep is not reality. Your dreams are not reality. So it's only when you awaken that you're faced with the reality. And it's only when you're facing the reality that you can put a hand to fixing it, addressing the reality, and making it into something palatable, something that works for you in a positive way. Okay? And so when I think about my journey from atheist to awake, if you go far enough back, I was raised in a church like so many other people, raised believing. Now, in our homes, let's just make it clear, the believing is sort of, it's relative to the particular adults that are in that home. Some simply believe for the sake of, in God we trust, this is a Christian nation and all that stuff. But as far as following the tenets of Christ, very few families, in comparison, do that. We simply embrace the title of Christian of Christ. And I want to say this conversation then holds true for the other religions as well. Primarily, the popular religions, the large ones, Islam and Judaism, pretty much the same thing. Many people consider themselves Muslims, but are not really practicing Muslims, and many people consider themselves Jews, but are not practicing the religion of Judaism. Okay, and so it's the same with the Christians. So this is where we're going, and that's how I came up, and that's how many people come up, simply believing and going to church, but then leaving home at a young age, 17, joining the military. It wasn't long before I became an atheist. And I was an atheist for like 10 years, just living a life, doing my thing, And then one morning I had what I call an epiphany. And I realized that it wasn't just me, okay? I realized that what I had believed as far as an atheist, what didn't really hold water, at least for me anymore. And so I decided that day that I was going to follow after God, okay? And the funny, interesting thing was I went through my apartment that day and I cleaned out everything in my apartment. I picked everything in my apartment that I loved. I had trophies, baseball, bowling, karate trophies. I had a jazz album collection. I had artifacts from the Orient, from Japan, from Korea, from Thailand. I had plants I was growing my own, and pictures from Japan, switchblade collection, all these things that I had loved, and I took them all to the dumpster that day and just threw everything. I had a bowling ball with a bowling bag and bowling shoes. I was on 3 leagues, each season and all at the same time. But everything that I loved, my karate uniform and my belt, that I practiced the martial art with so many different styles of martial art, but I always made an agreement with the instructors that I could keep my uniform, black pants, white top, and a blue belt. And so very important to me, those things. But when I realized, or I believed at that moment, that there was deity, those things that I had identified myself with, or that I had identified with, that they really weren't me. And I didn't identify myself with those things anymore. They had no importance in my life at all. And it was very important for me that day to get rid of all that stuff. So that was my journey. My journey from having been raised in the religion as a kid, from becoming an atheist to the point of religion. Okay? And I want to say then that awake came after the religion. Okay? But my journey then, the journey to being awake, religion was part of that journey. And I want to say that's very important because many of us are either atheists or we're some type of believer, on a scale of great believer or minimal believer. Yeah? But what I'm suggesting then is there is the next phase would be awake. Okay? When there was an old saying, religion was an opiate of the masses. And it's been taken sort of like negative, like blind following and all, but that phrase, what it actually meant was that an individual could go through suffering and still be okay as they embrace the religion. Now from another perspective, maybe from my perspective, it could be a little bit of both. Okay, because we really usually in the religion we deny all the other religions and simply embrace our own and believe that we have claim to God or to Allah or to Yahweh or to whatever the deity we choose to call that deity. And so in a sense that religion could be in a sense an opiate, having people simply blindly follow a particular way but wholeheartedly, earnestly believing that it's true. And see what I think the problem with that and with the religions is that religions are inclusive only of their own group, okay, and sort of reject other folks, like everyone's going to hell except for my group, those type attitudes. And so really, religions are like the catalyst to mistreatment of people, and just self-righteously justifying that mistreatment, this whole thing where that this is what I'm supposed to appropriate for myself, even if it's harming someone else. And so this is what religion does. It sort of justifies the mistreatment of other people, whether it be from other religions or race or nationality, whatever. We can embrace, they can embrace. We can all embrace these religions and justify how we respond to other people in sort of a bullying type way. And we see a very clear example, with the religions, whether we look at the people of like Pakistan versus India, or we look at the Muslims and the Christians, or the Muslims and the Jews in the Middle East, and the Christians as well. We can even see in the nation, in the United States, the attitude that at times this nation, calling ourselves a Christian nation, has against, Muslims, or people that we choose to demonize. So religion is often, probably almost always used as a tool, as a catalyst to mistreat people. And that mistreatment is in a sense bullying, because no one hardly ever mistreats an individual that they can't whip, okay, that they don't feel themselves greater than. So the religion not only creates within individuals a superiority, but it also creates within people a tendency to bully. And just to be clear, a bully can be passive and a bully can be aggressive, okay? So the aggressive bully is the one we always see, the one we are familiar with, on the playground or in the school or even in politics or, here or there, that's just bullying another individual. But the passive bullies are the ones that, are sitting by the side, watching what's going on, enjoying what's going on, and even in their own minds appreciating that they're not the one being bullied. So really they're a part of it. So bullies aren't always the aggressive ones, There are passive bullies as well. And so we might find ourselves, well, I'm not like that guy because I'm not doing what that individual is doing. But if you're reaping the benefits of what that other individual is doing, then you are yourself a passive bully, and that's just not good. We have to come to a place, in our society, and that's what the awake is. The awake is recognizing that there is a connection between all of us as human beings. And that as human beings, we can't mistreat each other, you know. There's this popular thing, especially in our nation right now, with the border issue, with these people who are fleeing oppression. And so many of us want to be hard-hearted and heavy-handed, but what I'm suggesting is, you know, even in the formation of this nation, we recognize that even having that attitude is a tremendous hypocrisy, and that many of those folks that settled this land or appropriated this land exploited, genocided the folks who are already living here, and sort of came into a place of appropriating this land, you know, in a heinous manner. And so now the offspring of those criminals now saying that, you know, we don't want anybody else coming here, it's kind of hypocritical. And you know, you might say, well, you know, it's only right because, you know, we can't just let everybody in and blah, all this stuff. But the reality is we do reap what we sow. You know, I know that's a religious term. We can say what goes around comes around. Chickens come home to roost, or there is a thing called karma. You know, however we want to paint it, there is a reality that however we respond to people, that there is like Newton's equal and opposite, you know, response to us. Okay, and so I think in our lives today, as we're searching for peace, we're also searching for prosperity. We're searching for wellness for ourselves and for our families, and what I'm suggesting is that's why the awake thing has to transcend you past religion, because religion really isn't the place to be. You want to go beyond religion, but for me, that was my path. It was like, you know, having started off, you know, early on in the church with my family. That's where I began. So when I became an atheist, you know, that's where I was. And then the part of the journey to awake was I had to go back to what I knew, and then from there I had to transition and go on to being awake. I think that's very important. I think I look at it very important for me to have been that atheist, because it allowed me to rid myself of knowing that I was right because this is what I was raised to believe, to coming to a place where if I have this epiphany, then, you know, that I didn't ask for, that I'm going to be challenging what I was raised to believe in seeking what truth is, okay? Because my feeling was, before I had this, what I call an epiphany, I had a pretty good life. Now, in retrospect, it may not have been that good, but at the moment, I was fine. And so I felt that, you know, if I was going to be adjusting my attitude against atheism and recognize that there is a truth beyond atheism, that I wasn't simply going to buy into the religion, even if it was the religion I was born into. I was going to spend my time seeking truth, regardless of how it challenged the belief that was imparted into me in my raising. Okay, and that's the journey I've been on for now. You know, I had that epiphany when I was 28. I'll be 67 this year, 2025, and I haven't deviated. I haven't, you know, what they call turned around or backslid or whatever you want to call it, because I think I slid through the religion. Now, when I say I slid through the religion and I transcended past the religion, you know, that took a good 30-some years. I mean, it wasn't, you know, just one day I was an atheist, then I was religion, and then I said, well, I'm going to be awake. No, it was a process. It was a process of embracing everything that I was raised to believe, but then, because that's all I knew. But then as I walked this walk out, I studied it, I researched. I mean, I would have holy books, 5 and 6, different ones on the floor, and challenging, each of them challenging the interpretation that the other had, and I would be studying them and using common sense and wisdom to try to determine what is true. And oftentimes, you know, I'd find the way what I was raised to believe just simply didn't make sense. And so I think as we're on this journey, this is what a lot of religious people don't do, and I think this is why they come with this attitude about people being woke. But being woke is very healthy. You don't want to be not woke. You want to be woke. You want to be awake. And so what I found over the years is, in order to become awake through religion, from religion, and then delivered from religion, is to start at this place where you have to assume that everything about the religion you believe, everything about God, Allah, Yahweh, deity, whatever you believe is probably not true. So now this journey is a journey to find truth, to seek truth. That's the only way it's going to work. But you cannot start this journey looking for truth, looking to become awake with certain determinations that I believe this and this is never going to change. Now, no, everything is on the table. Everything is on the table. It has to be challenged, whatever it is you believe. And you'll be surprised where that takes you. And I think what helped me in this, I want to say, deliverance from religion, not from spirituality, not from recognizing there was something greater than myself, was the 17 years I spent speaking to the young people, at juvenile detention. And at the same time, I was an elder, and then I was a pastor in a local church. And what I found was, if I was speaking to church folks in a church, just about everything I said, as long as it went down the party lines, they were going to amen me and clap me and, yeah, amen, brother, and all that. But when I'm sitting in front of these teenagers who have all different kinds of religious backgrounds, some of them even had relatives that were preachers, and some of them had relatives that were atheists. Some of them just had criminal, backgrounds, even in their families, from everywhere. And so you're not going to be able to speak to 40 kids, in an auditorium in orange jumpsuits and expecting them to amen you like they would in church. And they're going to ask you some questions. They're going to challenge you with certain questions that you just can't, write off. Like, what about all the people that, were born before Jesus, or where did, when Adam and Eve's kid, Cain, went off, where did he find his wife, from though? If Adam and Eve were the first people. I mean, you're going to find a whole lot of questions that you just can't write off. And for me, those questions help me to begin to challenge all the other things that I believe. Did they really make sense? Or there were simply things that I simply accepted because that's what it says in this book. And so I came to the place to where, even as a Christian minister, I think I would have called myself a progressive minister. Because I came to the point where I recognized that certain things in scriptures, in holy books, in all of the holy books, whether it's Islam, whether it's Judaism, whether it's Christianity and the others, are manipulative tools used to control, the masses. And that's where that whole opiate, of the masses come from, because people, especially if they're born generations and generations into that belief, the assumption is there from the following generations that this is simply true, and I'm not going to question it. And that is a place of religion, and that is a place that I believe if I hadn't become an atheist first, that's where I'd still be. But I spent years transitioning over into this awake, still spiritual, still believing, but not believing a lot of any of the things that alienate other folks, that justify me being okay and them not, okay? if there is an entity, if there is a deity that created all, and then there's a love from that deity for all of its children, regardless of how we may have determined that the deity accepts us and not them, okay? And so I think it's very important for one's prosperity. Because I do believe you reap what you sow. I do believe how you treat others, it comes back to you. Let me give you sort of, it's not really an abstract, but sort of maybe a little off the course a little bit, but an example of what I'm talking about. When my son was coming up in high school, especially around the 11th and 12th grade, he always worked. My daughter worked too. I don't know where they got that from, because I was never trying to work while I was in school. But anyway, he was working at a restaurant called Max and Irma's. It was a restaurant, and he was a server. And he's a real good young man, good personality, likes people like him. He does very well, now in the business world. But that's how he was always. And me, as far as me, I'm a big tipper when I go to restaurants. I mean a real big tipper. I mean I see all these people on the internet talking about, not tipping if it's a carry out or if they don't have. Man, I'm a big tipper. If it's a carry out, I'm a big tipper. If I have a bad server, I'm still a big tipper because I'm hoping that they're going to say, wow, I was a bad server and they still gave me a big tip and maybe it might affect them. Big tipper. Man, I've been at some places where I've tipped. My tip was larger than the meal cost simply because I recognized this server needed help. And that's the way I've always lived. That's the way I've always. If I had the money, I'd tip large, okay? And but what interesting is, he'd be calling me or talking to me or texting me or something and say, Dad, you wouldn't believe all the tips I'm getting. I'm getting way more tips than anybody else that I'm working with. He was amazed. He didn't know why, but he was just telling me. He was thrilled about it. And in my mind, in my heart, and I didn't even mention to him, was that the tips that I am imparting into other folks' children's lives, my son is reaping the benefit because he is my child and he is a servant, in another land, in another city. So what I learned early on was that it's very important to treat people very special, and you are going to be recipients on that same level of treatment that you're giving out. So as I was giving big tips to all these servers who were waiting on me in these restaurants, my son was reaping big tips in another city as a server to other people. So it's very important. So we recognize then, I want to use that to correlate to our lives as we're wondering why we're not being as successful as we would like to be. We're wondering why we're not as prosperous as we need to be. And you ask yourself then, how am I responding to other people? How am I treating them? Man, we really, see, now this is what I'm sharing with you is kind of hard to duplicate. But you can try to start in your own kind of way, what you can do. Like, in my life, I spent 17 years talking to those kids at juvenile detention. And man, I wouldn't go in there just to say something. Man, I would spend all week trying to prepare, trying to get ready, trying to give them some hope, trying to give them some love, trying to give them some insight, some wisdom, and maybe a different perspective on how to look at things so they can be well. And everything that I could think of that they needed in their lives, I would give them. And in retrospect now, I believe that 17 years, I received more out of those 17 years than I gave. And let me explain why. So every day when I'd go there, I'd speak to maybe 40 or 50 kids or so in a gymnasium. And as I shared, I would give them everything that I could from the depths of me to help them be well, to ensure their wellness, to give them a different way of viewing things, and love and peace of mind and happiness and contentment and anything you could think of. That's what I was doing for 17 years. But think of this. I calculated halfway through that 17 years that I had spoken to over 9,000 kids. Okay, that was on the halfway through point. Now think about this. There's one of me, and I've sowed into the lives positivity, goodness, happiness, love, help, peace of mind, hope, all the good things you can imagine into the lives of 9,000 kids. Now imagine if the concept of reaping and sowing is true. There's only one of me sowing into 9,000 lives. What do you think I'm reaping back? Man, I've lived through the same type situations in life that everybody else has. Folks look at my life now and they say, man, you're living large, you got this and you got that and all this stuff. And sometimes people think, man, I'd like to be that way. Or sometimes people might have an attitude with me about it, telling me, you just don't understand. But what I'm sharing with you, it wasn't always like this. But you do reap what you sow. And oftentimes what we're sowing is negativity. I mean, go on the internet, look into politics. Everybody's mad at each other. So you got two political parties primarily. One of them is like really harsh to everybody, being mean and harsh and unsympathetic and all. What do you think they're reaping back? But then you got the other party, they're all mad at this party and they're all just angry and vitriolic to this party. So they're really doing the same thing, and both parties are feeling they're justified by their attitudes. But what I'm saying is, what do you think they're reaping back? They're all reaping negativity. And yet, if you notice the stock market, I mean, you can blame it on whoever you want, but the reality is what reaping and sowing is true. If what goes around does actually come around, you know, we all have a part in this. And we have to make sure that we are doing our part to be good. So I'm suggesting, I guess, in the nutshell, that the journey to becoming awake is being good. It's being intentionally good. Being intentionally kind. Being intentionally accepting. And recognizing that everyone isn't going to be and to think like you, but they are just as much human, just as much deserving as you are. And I'm not even taking a side, like as far as the sexual orientation and all that. I'm not taking a side because what I see here often is both sides are not accepting of the other. We all have different opinions. It's not the opinion on what we believe is right and wrong. How do we respond to people who don't agree with us? That's the issue. So you got these folks over here saying, you know, I don't believe in the trans thing, and you shouldn't, you know, God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, and just being all harsh and everything. But then you got the folks over here being all harsh to these guys, trying to insist that you recognize me for what I am. And so there's negativity going on everywhere. And each side feels they're justified in their negativity. And I'm saying you're justified in having an opinion on what is right or wrong, what is biological or not biological, what is spiritual, what is not spiritual. You know, what is, you know, we all have our opinions. The opinions are not the issue. The issue is how are we responding to each other, okay? And it's simply that. And I'm saying that is the journey. See, there are people that believe they're awake or believe they're woke just because they embrace this particular ideology. But no, your awakeness or your awoke is how you're responding to people you disagree with. And how you're responding to people who disagree with you. So the whole idea about being woke or being awake is not so much for the sake of the individual that you are responding to. But it's for your own well-being. And so I can tell you, you had more than half a nation that's not being prosperous because we are not accepting on either side. And the shame is that I think most of us are good-hearted. You know, we're not that harsh to people. Until we become part of a mob mentality, until we embrace a particular, you know, cheerleader or leader that we're identifying with, that's coaxing us and moving us and focusing our attention on folks that we can mistreat, folks that are not like us for whatever reason, you know. And that's just not good. It's not awake, and it means really that we're not awake. We want to wake up. So my journey then was from atheist was to revert back to what I knew in religion, and then functioning in that religion, but ever evolving, never being satisfied, embracing stuff that couldn't possibly be true, that didn't make any sense, things that alienated other people, and gave the impression that we were right and nobody else was. That's the path I've been on, and that's where I'm today, and it's done very well for me. And what I think what it's given me is a peace of mind. You know, it's easy to have peace of mind when things are going well for you. But it's also easy to have peace of mind when things are not going well for you if your peace of mind is not determined by the things that you have, and your peace of mind is determined by the state of your mind, that which dwells within you, okay? And that's where I'm suggesting today, it doesn't really matter what goes on the outside. If you recognize who you are and function in that peace and giving it a helping hand to folks who need it. And without withholding, not on my tax dollars, don't do that. Yeah, don't let folks who are in a different place than you, who have different agendas than you. Don't let yourself be used by them to sacrifice your peace of mind to fulfill their political agendas. How's that? Man, I know that's heavy. So what I've shared with you is that I traveled that path. From atheist to religion to awake. Religion is not where you stop. Religion is like, I don't know, I can give you a firm foundation to stand on while you're looking over to see what else is out there for you, but it's not the place where you take up residence. Don't take up residence in the religion. Wake up. Your life will change for the better. You'll begin reaping what you sow when you're treating people right. You'll begin to become successful. You'll become prosperous. You'll be getting ideas. When your mind isn't all bent and angry and convoluted against people, taking up so much, it's almost like a computer taking up all this angry memory. There's not enough memory there to begin figuring out ways to become prosperous. So release that negativity. That's what being awoke is. Release that negativity toward other people simply because they're not like you, simply because they don't think like you. You don't have to think like them. You don't have to embrace what they embrace, but release the negativity that you have toward them and recognize that they have as much right to believe what they believe as you have to believe what you believe. That's acceptance. Man, I have friends, I have all kinds of friends that I'm not like. And we're cool. We're at peace with each other. And I hope and I believe that even in my conversations with them, I have sort of deflated some of that harshness. With them recognizing that I can be a man totally opposite of what they believe. And we can still be friends. That's the key. That's the journey from atheist through religion to awake. And kick that around. And I do want to thank you for joining me once again for another perspective. And I want to invite you to join me again. You take care. Bye.